is about 6 years ago now, so this was more like 7 years ago. I've been interested in the interface between clicks and code. In particular, I was interested in how people who write code for a living can help people who build apps declaratively be more productive. At the time, I was working with an on-premise framework, and with an on-premise framework, it was pretty easy. The vendor gave copies of the source code to anyone who had a support contract, and you can look through it, see what you needed to override, and just override it. And you could change any aspect of the framework you wanted that way. Now, when I got to Salesforce, I saw this was kind of a new challenge because obviously we're not on-premise, we're multi-tenant. A single tree is shared by everybody, and obviously for a variety of reasons, security being just the start, we can't actually let people override anything in the source code. So I started thinking about, well, how in a multi-tenant environment could we allow this kind of collaboration? Could we actually make it so that developers could work to make admins and declarative developers more productive? And I thought about this for a while, and kind of every version of this I could think of came down to this sort of one core, custom metadata types. And I don't know if you know, at Salesforce we've got, it's actually really a cool benefit called personal time on. I don't know, how many people out here have ever heard of personal time on? Probably heard of related programs at other companies. The idea is that you get 12 days a year to work on whatever you want, more or less. And it doesn't count against your vacation time or anything like that, as long as you can make some argument that it has something to do with your job. And I took a couple of these, so I actually had to do this over a few years to work up some proofs of concept. And finally, with some help from a wonderful variety of other people, we managed to get a team funded. And custom metadata types is basically what the team's been working on so far. You've all seen slides that look very much like this before. I won't belabor the details. I'll make it clear later in here. I'm going to talk about some things that are not in the release yet. Don't make any purchasing decisions based on anything that does not actually exist in production today. I'll try to be very clear about when I'm talking about things that are forward-looking. So far, we've gotten some great feedback on custom metadata types. Obviously, I've sort of focused on the most soundbitey things here. But one thing the main point here that I'd really like to impress upon people is that Salesforce in general, but specifically our team, we're very much a kind of listening team. And I think in the program you all have my Twitter handle. You have any further questions after this talk, please go ahead and send me a direct message or whatever you want to do. If you try it out and you have feedback, we would absolutely love to hear it. So the idea of custom metadata types is that they're a lot like custom objects, except their records are themselves part of the configuration of the application. The reason that we sometimes use these sort of turtles standing on the back of turtles is the idea that the quote data, that is the individual records of these, themselves form a platform. So you can sort of have platforms on top of platforms on top of platforms. So when we call this a metadata type, I want to make sort of distinctions between two different kinds of objects in Salesforce. There are your regular data objects. Those are kind of most of the objects that your application talks about. And they're the things that your end users will actually manipulate. Accounts, most custom objects. And then there are the metadata objects. And these are sorts of objects that are manipulated by admins as part of building the app. So they're not what the app is about. Their records are part of the app itself. To make this a little more concrete, like we said, we've got all of our usual standard objects over there. And of course, we let you build custom ones too, similar sorts of business objects. I've given these examples, warranty and project. And then we have these various metadata types. And these metadata types are things like validation rules. And obviously your user doesn't build validation rules, you do. But the type, in that case, is actually a standard type. While you write validation rules, the object validation rule is something that Salesforce created. And the idea that a custom metadata type is kind of more like one of those than it is like one of the standard objects, but you actually create them. They're not actually that new. Their most accessible form came out in winter, but and they had a sort of early GA release actually last summer, but they're certainly the newest among these by far. So before custom metadata types rolled around, what a lot of people did when they needed custom types of configuration objects is they used either custom settings, in particular list custom settings. Hierarchical custom settings are a little bit different because they're sort of on a per user level. Or regular custom objects that they just said, well, okay, the admins are going to be the ones creating records of these objects because they're actually going to determine things like application flow. And the main issue with doing that is when it's time to distribute your application. And this could mean either deploying in sort of an enterprise ALM situation from one server to another, or if you're an ISV, it could mean packaging and installation and upgrades. And the thing about custom settings and custom objects is, you can deploy or package them in the sense of deploying or packaging that header information. The list of fields, the type of each field, all that sort of stuff. But if you're actually building your application by populating these things, you can't actually package all of this. You can package warranty, but you can't package individual warranties. For ISVs, this has been, I think, a really major headache before custom metadata types came around, because basically, you had to use install scripts or something to basically recreate your metadata configuration in every single org you installed in. And then with upgrades, you had to figure out even trickier a way to write the upgrade script so that it updated the right sorts of records and not the other ones and that sort of thing. But even in an ALM context for an enterprise, this is an enterprise configuration that we see pretty regularly, is that the enterprise developers do their work in developer edition organizations. And then when it comes time to sort of do integration testing, they push them into maybe a setup-only sandbox. And then when it comes time for their actual users to do testing, they push it into a full sandbox. And then they've got a staging area. And then they might have two different versions of production. One that's kind of the current main branch, and then one that's, for little internal pilots and that sort of thing. And they might have to have something that they can copy production over to so that their support staff can poke around in it. And again, if you build the application configuration with custom objects or custom settings, that's a lot of copying to do. And there you actually can't use an install script because these aren't installs, just deployment, except for possibly the very first step there. Custom metadata types differ from these in that the actual records, in addition to the header information being deployable, these actual records are deployable just in the way that, validation rules can be deployed. You could actually deploy, the examples I gave in the earlier case, say a stock point rule or a set of stock point rules. So it makes ALM a lot easier. If you want to do continuous integration, before you had to basically do a lot of fancy stuff in your deployment scripts. With custom metadata, with records of custom metadata types, you can actually store the records in your source control and just deploy just the way you deploy any sort of standard types of Salesforce metadata. On the more manual side, things we've seen people using data loader to move sets of configuration records from one system to another. Some people had basically gotten down to the point where they had to have two browser windows open, and they would just open the UI, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. And some people just develop their configurations in production to sort of save all of that. I mean, you strictly speaking can do that because it's not Apex, it's declarative records, and so you could just skip the whole sandbox part if you don't care about actually testing your configuration very much. And again, here, I mean, we support with custom metadata records. You can just use change sets. You can create them in the Eclipse IDE and deploy them. You can deploy them through any of the sort of automated tools or Workbench. And of course, in the unmanaged case, probably of interest to enterprises too, but particularly in the managed case, most interest to ISVs, you can package them. And people can install them. I'm going to make this a little bit more concrete now. I'm going to sit down here and show you a little bit of a demo. I should actually, before I do the demo, ask how many people here have at least played a little bit with custom metadata types? Okay, so about a third. Good. Then this will be probably of great interest to many of you if you haven't seen this. So here I've created a custom metadata type that I call danger level support mappings. And the idea here is that this is a company that sells vacation packages. And that also has a concept on accounts of the account's level of support contract. And the idea is that some of these vacations are more, let's say, exciting than others. And that if you're going on a particularly exciting vacation, you have to have a pretty high level of support contract because you may need to be calling support quite a lot. Actually, look at the object here. You can see it looks an awful lot like a custom object. And in fact, it's got two custom fields on it. It's a little bit different in terms of its standard fields because, for example, we have to maintain things like a namespace prefix. Because this could actually be included in a managed package. But we've got our custom fields here. This pick list is new beta in Spring as a field type for custom metadata. And we can go ahead and we can manage our danger level support mappings. And we've already got a few. If it's a very mild vacation, you don't need any particular support level, but as we get more interesting, we need more. And if I want to create a new one, I want to make it clear I haven't done very much in this particular case, but unlike, say, custom settings, this is a layoutable user interface. So I actually could go to edit layout. I could change around the order of these fields if I wanted. It's a more flexible user interface. It's more like, although not quite as powerful as a regular custom object UI, but it looks a lot like it. And let's see, we're going to call this complete insanity. I'm going to take off the silly X5 at the beginning there. That's the name of the actual danger level. So I'm not quite used to this keyboard. And let's say that this is going to require platinum support. Didn't actually take. Okay, well, so far, okay, so this looks a lot like a custom setting. But now I'm going to show you how you would go about deploying it. I'm not actually going to do the deployment because none of us need to actually sit through a deployment. But I am going to at least populate this outbound change set here. And I've created the change set, although I've not yet put anything in it. And I'm going to add some components. And the first thing I'm going to do is add my custom metadata type. We're assuming this is a first deployment. Obviously, if I don't change the type itself, like add fields, I don't need to redeploy the type in the future. But this is a first deployment, so we're going to go down to custom metadata type, and we have exactly one danger level support mapping. Go ahead and add that to the change set. But then I'm going to do something a little more unusual. Danger level support mapping is actually a type of metadata component. It's a type of metadata component that is not part of the standard Salesforce set of metadata components, but it is one. So I actually, if I look under component type and go down here, we actually have danger level support mapping as the type of component, and there are all of our records. And I can add all of them to the change set. Like I said, I'm not going to worry about uploading and stuff right now. But there you go. Before I go on, any questions about the demo? So I'm actually going to, that one I'll ask you to hold off on because I'm actually going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. But yes. That was an important thing to notice. That was not a custom field. That was a standard field. Okay. Let's get out of here and back to this. Okay. So here's a bunch of functionality that you might expect out of an object that, rather than being user data, the records are actually part of the configuration of your application. The first one is, you can describe a lot of types of metadata as many times in a transaction as you need. And if you've used list custom settings, you're probably used to the static methods there that aren't subject to the 100 times per Apex transaction governor limit. Custom metadata is not subject to the 100 queries per metadata transaction. You actually access them through SOQL queries. So it's a slightly more flexible way to access them than list custom settings. But those SOQL queries, we mark them specially internally so that they don't count towards your 100 queries per transaction. We found that very useful. Some people use these basically as a kind of business rule for a rules engine, and obviously a rules engine needs to be able to do possibly huge numbers of queries per transaction. We've already talked about using retrieve and deploy and package install. Native user interface, I should probably even take this off this slide because this is pretty expected. It just wasn't there in summer 15, so we added this record to the slide. But again, it's layoutable, unlike the list custom settings interface, which is just basically every field straight down a list. This gets into the protected checkbox you were talking about. So with list custom settings and custom metadata types, you have an option to mark an object as protected. And this is not relevant unless you deploy the object in a managed package. But if you deploy the object in the managed package, then basically it's invisible except to your own Apex code that you deployed with it. The thing that's different is that we also allow protection on individual records, which basically means if you deploy a record in a managed package, and that record is marked protected, even though the package is, even though the type is public, then basically queries in the subscriber org only match the record if they would otherwise match, and the query is from code in the package. So, so basically, subscribers to the package, people who install it, can't directly see the record. They can only see the record as much as your application shows it to them. Sorry. I would say so. We don't, it's more for sort of IP protection. So we don't guarantee the level of strong encryption that we do for, say, encrypted fields. But for things like API keys, it's a pretty reasonable place to put them because we've tested and you can't see it from the subscriber org. Unless, of course, you make a UI that displays it that's in your own namespace, in which case. Yes, you could encrypt it as well. We don't currently support encrypted fields, but you could manage the encryption if you wanted to be extra paranoid. But in a lot of cases, it's for just we don't want subscribers to be able to see these records because there's something fancy in them that we don't want them to duplicate, basically. Unless they figure out how to do it too. But yes, we've got cases where people are storing API keys in them, and like I said, I wouldn't want to hold it up to the same security level that, say, actual Salesforce passwords are held up to, but we do hide it pretty solidly. Control over editability of fields, I'll talk about a little bit later. It's another thing that only applies to, in this case, types deployed. It applies to records deployed in managed package. It has to do with who can edit what field values on the records, but we'll go into that in a little more detail in a moment. Changes to records are in the setup audit trail, which makes a lot of sense since they're setup records. Changes to custom objects, obviously, are tracked through a totally different mechanism. You can, enable history. And I don't believe there's any way to track changes to custom settings records right now. So that's something new. And then we've got some stuff that, forward-looking statement warning, stuff that isn't quite here yet. Pick lists are beta in the new spring release. It's actually not so much that they themselves are beta, but they're restrictive pick lists, and the restricted pick list feature is beta. So since we rely on it, we say that they're beta as well. The thing we're currently working on, fair confidence we'll get this into GA in this spring, but the thing we're currently really working on the most is relationships. Right now, relationships between different types of custom metadata, so a record of one type can point to a record of another type. In the longer term, we also want to support relationships between custom metadata types and some standard types of metadata, so that, for example, a custom metadata record can point to the account object or a custom object. Not a record of those objects, but actually can point to the header. That's probably will not be in summer, but actually 50-50 chance it'll be in summer, at least in a pilot form. And currently we don't have support in Apex natively for actually changing the records of custom metadata. And that's kind of just like standard metadata, right? I mean, you can't change custom fields inside Apex. So right now you can either use our native UI or I don't know if anyone here, for example, is familiar with Andrew Fawcett's metadata API. It supports custom metadata, so you can use that to do basically callouts to the metadata API from Apex that will make changes to the records. But it's not really natively inside Apex. Okay. So field value editability. And you may not be familiar with these terms, but certainly if you've worked with managed packages before, you've seen the concepts before. When you create a custom field on a custom metadata type, you can specify the field is locked, upgradable, or subscriber editable. If a record doesn't get released in a managed package, none of this means anything. But for records of that type released in a managed package, what locked means is once the record is released, so that's uploaded in a managed package that is not beta, the value of that field on that record can't be changed. It's basically the field counts as a contract that, releasing a production package means we've made this contract that that's what this field value on this piece of metadata is going to be. Upgradable means that the person who released the record in the managed package, that organization, can change the value and it will be used to automatically overwrite the old value in package upgrades. So that's probably the most commonly used field type. It's basically, I want to maintain control over this. Subscriber editable basically means, well, as the creator of the record, I'm going to specify a value, and that's going to be the default value of the record, but I want to let my subscribers change that, override it for their organization. Upgrades in the future won't touch the field because, of course, we don't want to blow away subscriber customizations. So you basically decide, if you want the field to be editable at all after record upload, you decide whether you want the developer to have control or the subscriber to have control over the edits. So you can actually have a lot of control over editability using a combination of field level editability and record protection. So for example, if you divide your records into these sort of three groups, so your public managed records basically behave, the field editability just behaves like it says on the tin. If it's upgradable, you can change it. The person who creates the record can change it in the future. If it's subscriber editable, the subscriber can change it. If you protect records, of course, a subscriber can no longer change anything about them because a subscriber can't see them. So that's basically a way to say, okay, yes, I know these fields are subscriber editable, but admittedly, you have to do something else, which is keep the subscriber from seeing the records at all, but except via your own code. But that lets you lock it down. And if you want to say, I want to ignore everything and let the subscriber edit it all, you can always use an unmanaged extension to release those records. And since field editability only affects records released in managed packages, these will be entirely subscriber editable. And that's basically, saying, once these are in my subscriber org, I relinquish control of them. I'm not going to go through this entire slide. I know these slides will be posted afterwards, so you can look at it if you want then. But basically, we've already, just the main point is we've only touched on some of the advantages here. People with applications that already exist that use list custom settings. In most cases, converting from using list custom settings over to custom metadata types, if you want these new advantages, is actually not too hard. The cases we've usually seen about 3 to 5 person days to do it. What the people usually did was they downloaded all their metadata, and they basically used XSLT to transform and downloaded their data to basically transform the data into custom metadata records and the custom settings headers into custom metadata types. They were able to remove a lot of this. If what you're mostly doing with your Apex code around this stuff is creating the records in a post-install script, you probably don't have to do that anymore because you can just deploy the records rather than having to recreate them in each organization. One thing they did have to do with their Apex is replace references that ended in an __C to references that ended in an __MDT because we do have a different suffix for metadata types. And then they had to find calls to the static custom settings methods and replace them with SQL queries. The one case where it's not this easy is if you've currently got code to create or edit custom metadata or your custom settings records that isn't part of install. If you were letting your users change them in response to certain things, then since we don't have native Apex support, you now have to convert that over to use Metadata API to use a call out. And so that can complicate this process. But if you're not doing that sort of thing, if all your writing code was part of an install script, you can often just get away without having to do anything in that direction. Our sort of immediate roadmap. As we said, pick lists are beta. We want to get them out in summer. In case it's not obvious, roadmap equals forward-looking. These relationships, we want to at least get at the bare minimum what we're really pushing for summer, and I'm pretty confident we're going to make it, although again, pilot of relationships between custom metadata types so that a custom metadata record refers to another custom metadata record. Our kind of stretch goal is also to let custom metadata records refer to object headers. And that's more of a 50-50 for summer. Sure. So I've got a type of metadata that, say, is going to drive a process that can be applied to multiple objects. But I need to configure the process differently for each object. So, suppose it's, say, a general type of business rules engine. Then I want some rules to apply to account. I want some rules to apply to contact. I want some rules to apply to my special warranty custom object, and so on. Right now, what you do basically is you type in the API name, and then you're responsible for. You can do that by making a text field, but that's not referential integrity checked. It's not automatically added to packages, all that sort of stuff. The advantage of the relationship field is you can actually do join queries. It actually gets added to. Spidered into packages. You won't be able to simply delete the custom object if you have custom metadata that refers to it, so you won't mess up your metadata integrity that way. And then when we get metadata relationships out the door, a lot of people want long text. We're considering rich text as well. We've had some people with use cases for that. Although the main use cases there is basically people want to store longer descriptions. And probably the one limitation there is going to be that if your query queries one of the long text area fields, we're probably going to have to count it. We're not going to be able to make that a free query anymore. It'll actually count towards but we'll actually check what columns you're querying, and it'll still be free if you don't query the long text. Okay, but now I want to talk about stuff that's not on the immediate roadmap, but that I think will kind of help you see how this fits into the vision that I talked about at the beginning. This is sort of standard Salesforce architecture, and I've sometimes seen this called the Salesforce advantage. And yes, it's a big advantage for our developers, but it's actually a huge advantage for us. And the idea is that increasingly, we're building our CRM apps on the platform. And that means that when you guys develop apps, either for other people or for your own company, they integrate very seamlessly with them. They get to take advantage of the same framework, and it basically lets you, since you guys can enhance and supplement our CRM apps, we basically get lots of cool stuff for free because there are people doing feature work that we couldn't possibly do. Custom metadata types are part of this kind of platform on the platform vision, which I like to call the insert your company here advantage. Because the idea is that in addition to our making a platform for our apps, it lets you customize the platform. So if you're an ISV, you can build your own apps on your own specialized extension of the platform and have your customers do it as well. Or if you're in an IT department, you can have your hardcore developers extend the platform in a way that lets these guys do lots of stuff with clicks. And the heart of this really is custom metadata types, because the idea behind how this goes is a developer is going to create a custom metadata type in most cases. We've now seen actually a few use cases where the people creating the custom metadata type aren't even coders, but sort of the bog standard case. The person who creates the type is doing it because they're going to write component-based Apex code around it. And what I mean by component-based there is it's code that's intended to be reusable in a variety of situations. And the situations don't have to be identical because it's configurable in some way. It can be made to do slightly different stuff based on deferring to stuff that's to the records of a custom metadata type. And now configuring that code and adapting it for new cases is just a matter of making more records of the type that now, can be passed into the same code. And interesting stuff can happen. And of course, making the records is, our sort of standard, I'm sure you've all seen this expression, clicks not code process. It's not that there's no development work here, but the development work is all front-loaded. This slide is mostly stuff you've seen before. This is all stuff that, you might expect metadata types to have. Salesforce, the standard ones already provide it. The only one that we don't yet provide here is those relationships. But there are another couple of things. And these are two of the three vision things that I want to talk about. One is, standard metadata types, like validation rule. You can apply validation rules to a variety of objects. And they affect how all of those different objects save. A trigger you have to write against a single object, but the general process by which validation rules are enforced applies widely. And the other is shape and describe data, which for standard things is our various data types, which include both single column types like text and number, which each have their own descriptive attributes, like digits to the right of the decimal point only counts for number. Or even some multi-column things like geolocation, which has sub-bits, latitude and longitude. So for affecting the save process across business objects, our vision is to implement something called dynamic triggers. And basically, thank you. A dynamic trigger is a special type of Apex trigger that you don't write it on a specific object. Instead, you associate it with a custom metadata type. And the idea is, and this is another place where those relationships to object headers come in, people create records of custom metadata to configure it for the various objects it's going to apply to. And in the code of the trigger, you can access as a static trigger variable which S-object type is currently being saved, and what the custom metadata related to that object is, so that the code can be configured for the various objects. So you could have your own rules engine that triggers on save for any configured object and uses that object's configuration to determine exactly what to do, while the configuration is declarative. Custom data types, the idea here is to help you shape and configure your data. They're new field types, would be the idea. You could make them compound, like geolocation, or single column, like number. And to specify extra field properties, basically you associate a custom metadata type and put some fields on that custom metadata type. And the idea would be that when the admin sets a data type for the new custom field, the wizard sort of will automatically automate collecting those properties for you. And will create the field of that data type, and we'll have all of that extra information, basically the custom metadata record that's relevant, available to code that processes any field of that type. Last thing I'm going to cover, this is not exactly about custom metadata types. I said earlier you can't change things like custom fields in Apex, and you can't write custom metadata records in Apex. We would like to change that. It won't be exactly like an Apex insert, but we would like to eliminate that call-out step. And that would include, but not necessarily be limited to, actually probably not be limited to changes to custom metadata records. Ideally, we'd like to let you create custom fields and things like that in Apex. Obviously, this is a totally useless slide to you guys now, but when this is posted, this is a set of resource links. And I think since I took some questions earlier, we only have like 2 minutes left for Q&A. But I'd like to thank you to start with for listening and ask you to talk. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. Roadmapped. Sorry. It's not actually there yet. Now, we are aware of translatability as a gap and do want to provide some sort of workbench-style translation for the records. Sorry, did you? Oh. Oh, sorry. Let me go over here first, then I'll come back to you. In fact, an open source or managed package available version that is also by Andy Fawcett. So if you go to andyinthecloud.com, it's a sample app that he's got in GitHub from his site. And yes, it has recently been released using custom metadata types, which means that the rollups are actually deployable now. Previously, they weren't. The app is older, but the new version actually uses custom metadata types, so you can deploy your rollups. Yes. Make the type public and make the records protected. Oh. You could do it with a unique field, probably. You could just ignore anything that doesn't match a whitelist. I think that would probably be the best way to do that at this point. Yeah. Yeah, basically. And that wouldn't stop people from creating them, but it would. You could code your runtime stuff so that it just ignored them. No, I'm sorry. That is part of that longer term vision. I hope we can get to it soon. Probably not the next couple releases, though. That's why it was not even on that roadmap section, because it's far enough out that we don't know exactly when we're. The metatype records, part of that is just because the records aren't Apex editable, so it's not quite clear what we would do with triggers there. After we have Apex DDL, we can reopen that question. I don't want to promise it, but we'll reconsider it after you can actually write the manipulate the records in Apex as opposed to just read them. Yes, probably in around the same time frame. We hope to have let you have declarative validation rules. We don't currently support them, but I'm beginning to suspect that it's not that hard. And it looks like our time is up. So I just want to click forward one more time so that, hey, I can thank you and remind you to turn in the event survey. And thank you all very much for coming.